Does your vibrato feel and sound as stiff and forced as mine just did? Well then, today's video is for you. We'll talk about 5 things you can do to truly take your vibrato to the next level and let it become what I think is maybe the most powerful expressive technique on the guitar. It's also something that differentiates us from many other instrumentalists who don't have the luxury of manipulating sound to the depth that we have on this wonderful instrument. The first thing we should discuss about vibrato is, of course, how we do it, so the technique behind it. And there are many ways of doing vibrato. You might have seen this horizontal one, maybe a more exotic one such as the circular. We could use the bar. But today we'll focus on the main one, from which basically your taste derives, and then you can apply it to all these other ones. And that is vertical vibrato. That's where you'll find yourself 90% of the time, which means we hit a note and we bring it up or down, as we'll see, to a different pitch and then back to create this modulation. A few things I want to warn you about. First of all is don't do vibrato and much less bends with your fingers like this, like that. Surprisingly, because we're used to the tiny muscles of the fingers to be the precise muscles in our everyday life, once they meet with resistance, such as the string, they become really hard to control. And I've often demonstrated with my students when it comes to bends, if you hold the bend with the finger, it's really hard to maintain that note. And with bends, of course, pitch is extremely important. But you can try now grabbing the fretboard and using the whole wrist. You can go as high as you want, and then you can just hold it. If you bring a tuner out, you see that I'm holding the same exact note. And so you have a lot more control actually when you delegate the tension instead of your fingers to the wrist. So what I suggest you do is you bring your thumb up here, and then with a movement of the whole wrist, you just bring your note up or down as you wish. Now, when you do that, the fulcrum is here in this part of the hand, and that's all you're going to move. Your fingers do not actually sway or move. Your fingers will stay put and go up or down, like that. Which brings us to the second part of the technique, which is, should we go up or should we go down? I don't care, just don't do both. Don't do this. This sounds so frantic, so unless it's a special effects you want to create, I hate that sound. So you should probably decide if you prefer going upwards or downwards. And for me personally, even though I can get the same sound both up and down, I find that overall as a feel, I tend to associate the upwards bend as a more controlled sound. Right? I'm working kind of against my body, I'm pulling up. Whereas when I go down, it's easier, it goes with gravity, and it goes a little more out of control. I find it a bit more wild, so to speak. And so for me personally, unless I'm forced to do one or the other, such as on the 6th and 1st string, I tend to gravitate towards an upwards bend, or sorry, an upwards vibrato, when I'm trying to really be controlled with it. And if I'm a little wilder, I might go downwards, but I leave it up to you, of course, to decide. The second parameter I like to talk about is depth. Now, depth is maybe the most obvious and overt part of vibrato that you hear. It's basically how far from the note I go. I can go very subtle, make it wider, maybe too wide, and actually you can go so far out that it becomes a bend, it becomes a different note. Usually I try to reside within the 0 to 50%, right? I don't like too extreme vibratos unless I'm going for an effect. Subtle vibrato is something that you can use more often, is something that can blend into your playing, so you could actually play phrases where every note has a vibrato. If I did it wider, it would be a little disconcerting, right? So if I bring the vibrato up in width, then it's usually on a single note or fewer notes, and it's also a note that I might have a bit more time to develop. I'm probably not going to do these big vibratos on quick notes. I just don't have time to let it breathe. Whereas if I have a long note, see, I can get away with more of a vibrato here. It is not a rule, of course, but that's an interpretation I have. This is something you might want to think about, and maybe you've caught yourself doing your vibratos without thinking, so this was something you might want to explore in more depth. Now, as a little exercise, as a little tool to improve it, you might do the following. Again, pick a note, any note, and start playing with the slightest of vibratos. Right? Up or down. I'm going to go up now. You can, of course, do the same thing downwards. When the note dies out or when you're bored, you just bring it up just a little bit. Yeah? If you think in percentages, maybe go from 5 to 10. And then go maybe a little more. And then a little more. There's a point at which you start really hearing it. And it doesn't have to be ugly. It's just a bit more obvious. And get a feel for how it feels when you hear it and what it transmits and what kind of emotion transpires. And it's an endless practice, and you should practice on all strings in all frets. So you go way up, and you'll find that some strings, it's harder to be subtle, and we'll talk about that later, because the tension on each string is different, and it's also different on every fret. So certainly something to think about. The other fundamental thing we want to think about when we do vibrato is, of course, speed. Speed is basically the rate at which we modulate a note. And similarly to depth, we can go from a very slow speed, almost imperceptible. You can hear the cycle. I'm going to make it a bit deeper. It almost sounds like you're tuning the guitar. Or you can go a lot faster and not so subtle. Okay? It's not like one is more valid than the other, but when you really sit down and listen to all these options, you see that they have totally different effects emotionally and as far as the feel of it goes. And that's what we're trying to get across today. As far as speed goes, again, there are no rules. I enjoy all of them. One thing I would suggest is that you at least explore the possibility of the vibrato going in time with what you're playing. So here's a little exercise / example. Let's say I'm playing at this rate, at this tempo, 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's establish a medium low depth of vibrato like this. This would be my depth. One thing I could try, first of all, is, hey, I got this beat. Let me follow the beat with quarter notes so that each beat corresponds to a cycle of my vibrato. That makes perfect sense. So it would be 1, 2. Okay? If I am playing over a song, this will make my solo playing or my melody blend into the song, because I'm following the tempo of the song. If I ever want to break away from it, I'm free to do so, but it will certainly have an effect. And I know a lot of you just play vibrato, you might have never thought of the power of going with or against the grain of the tempo. You can go a little deeper with this by subdivisions. So instead of playing quarter notes, we might try to play 8 notes. So it would be like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Same tempo as before, but now I'm playing my vibrato at twice the speed, like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You hear both cycles within each beat. 1 and 2 and. Okay, and then I can make it triplet or 16 notes. And you can take it further. And that's something you should really work on. So again, let's bring it back to a very simple exercise. Play any melody, you just make up a couple of notes, doesn't have to be complex. And now try to focus on both the width and the rate. So it will sound very different if I do this. Medium rate, low width or depth. Now I'm going to go for a faster rate and a deeper vibrato, and all the stuff in between. I can go slow but deep, kind of like that. I can do the opposite, very fast and very shallow, and everything in between. So I leave you to that and then move on to fundamental 4 of vibrato. Now for number 4, I want to bring your attention to something that is not often discussed, but it's very, very important, at least in my interpretation of what makes vibrato special. And sometimes when I hear people play, and all the notes have vibrato, first of all, but also I notice that I'm not hearing any note that is pure. I always hear the notes modulating. And so as everything else, such as volume and intensity and speed, if everything is constantly happening, it loses a lot of its power. And so here's something I would like you to consider. If you're a singer and you were singing like this, where every word is modulating, it would be extremely distracting. Usually great singers, and I will spare you my interpretation, will often start a note and then develop a vibrato. So just like a human voice, you could maybe start playing a note just as it is and slowly bring in the vibrato as the note rings out. And it's much more powerful, it's much more musical, and it's subtle. It lets you play with basically the envelope of how the vibrato appears and maintains or disappears. It's not a fixed thing. You can actually mold it to your needs. It's much more musically satisfying as well. One thing you can try is now play a note, live with that note. Don't feel that you have to, do something to it. Just live with it. Listen to it and try to listen to when it's basically asking you to give it a little extra life. Right? Okay? And I probably went way overboard with that, but it was just a demonstration. Let the notes live, let them be, and then once in a while give them the little accent. It's probably going to work wonders on your melodic playing. As the 5th and final thing I would like you to consider as you try to improve your vibrato is to make your experience of the technique 100% oral and basically none of it physical or visual. Take it away from your eyes and your fingers and make it an ear thing. Usually, because it's a complicated technique, there are many things to control, especially as you dig deeper and deeper into it. For example, every string has a different tension. So if I use the same strength to do this vibrato here, I barely get anything, but if I get used to this, I do it here, I actually run off the fretboard. We can actually get lost into the physicality of it. Whereas if you just close your eyes and listen to what you're doing, then you'll get a different experience of it. As a matter of fact, as I was playing this, I was hearing all kinds of stuff I didn't like. And if I were just focusing on the technique of it, I was doing quite all right, but I wasn't happy with the sound. I would suggest you basically forget that you have fingers, forget that you're looking at it, just listen to it. Listen to what the notes is asking for at that moment and try to mold it into existence, right? And another thing you can develop from this is, of course, all the previous physical stuff we looked at, so the technique and the depth and the width and the speed and also the delay or the breadth of the vibrato become malleable. So of course you can play a note and start at a speed and then speed up as the note requires. I went deep to shallow and fast to slow, all within 2 or 3 vibratos. And that's something that you can only get truly from listening. And so these are my 5 tips or 5 improvements to your vibrato technique. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I would love to hear your comments below. If you'd like to help me make more videos, please do like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference. And if you want to go a bit further, there's a Patreon you can subscribe to below. Thank you so much as always, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.